Hello everyone, my name is Anthony Vitale, and in this video I'm going to be going over a tiling texture workflow that I call the overlap sculpt. I'm going to be using Maya and Zbrush. I'm not going to be going over any sculpting techniques, I'm just going to focus on an overview of the workflow. So starting off in Maya, I have a plane for my tiling texture and some character reference. The plane is 2 Maya units by 2 Maya units. I'm going to be allocating 512 pixels per unit, so this is going to be a 1K by 1K texture. Here, I've already laid out the block that I'm going to make. It's just even quads without the back faces. For this workflow, I try to keep the meshes as light as possible. That's why I don't have the back faces. If I want different sides of the block, I'll just create more variants. If I were to do something organic like rock or stone, I would do the full model and not have the back faces removed. Now, I've already laid out the pattern, and I need 55 blocks to lay out this pattern. I'm just going to do an even 100. Before I duplicated them, if I open up my UV editor, I just did a basic UV pass on it. And I'm going to go ahead and duplicate it. And I'm going to, for the demo, do 5 different variants. On a real sculpt, I do anywhere from 4 to 16 depending on the surface I'm trying to create. I'm going to combine all these together. Now I have one mesh with 5 blocks. Now I'm going to duplicate this 20 times and then combine all that together. So I've already done that over here. So now what I have is I have 100 blocks broken up into 5 different clusters. Before I take in the Zbrush, I'm just going to move the UVs. So I have this texture and it has 16 different colors on it, and I move each variant into a different color swash. So you can see here like this. So now I'm going to export to Zbrush. These are the settings that I use. I'm going to export as an OBJ, and everything's on except for materials. Now that I've imported my mesh into Zbrush, I'm going to start sculpting. Subdivide my mesh. There we go. And the reason I call this an overlap sculpt is because I have meshes that overlap over each other. So now when I'm sculpting, I'm not sculpting 1 brick, I'm sculpting 20. You see here. So I'm going to skip ahead because I already sculpted my blocks. Here's my finished sculpt of my 5 variants. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this as Zbrush, and I'm going to save this as my overlap sculpt because I always want to keep this intact. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to drop this to subdivision 4. The reason I'm dropping to subdivision 4 is I still want to maintain the silhouette of my block, but I want to stay around a couple 100,000 polygons because I'm going to be exporting this back into Maya. I'm going to export, and under my OBJ, I'm going to save this as my overlap OBJ. Okay, now that I brought my mesh in from Zbrush, I applied that color swatch material on it, and now I have my 5 variants. So I'm going to select it. I'm going to convert selection to vertices. I'm going to go to Animation, Create Deformer, and Cluster. There you go. So if anybody's unfamiliar with the cluster, it's a way of putting a transform on a set of vertices. To speed this up, I just put this little button together, which just converts my selection to vertice and then clusters it. So I can do that. And if you have a knack for scripting, probably be fairly easy to write a script that would go through the polygon shells and then automatically cluster them all. So now I'm going to begin to lay out my pattern. So I went ahead and I clustered all the polygon shells and then put the mesh on a reference layer. Now the only thing I can select are the clusters. So now I can just easily start to lay out my pattern. Okay. I'm going to up my grid subdivision, grab them all, just line them there. I'm going to snap this one to the edge of the texture, and then I can use my alignment tools and go ahead and align those. So I'm going to skip ahead to the pattern I laid out. Okay, so here I went ahead and laid out my pattern, and I'm going to stop and talk a little bit about why I'm taking this approach. So I can lay this down in 2.5D, or I could use the multi-mesh insert brush, but there's a lot of things I continuously tweak and want to iterate on, and I just found that this gave me the freedom and flexibility to iterate on things. So it's nice the fact that they're all individual transforms, so I can quickly iterate and test out different patterns. If I want grout, no grout, want to make them a little bit smaller and a little bit taller and relay out the pattern, I have the flexibility to really do that and do it quite quickly. The other part of it is surface variation, specular breakup, and height maps. I just find that having like the subtle tilt and variation in the surface gives me a huge range of specular breakup. So even if it's like a pristine marble floor or just a really broken up cobblestone street, having all those angles and facets really catch lighting and give me a lot of range in my texture. The other part of that is height maps. They're really important in my workflow. I do a lot of layer blending, and I really want to noodle not only the angle and rotation, but also the Z depth to get full range out of my height map. So what's nice about this is I can snap and align these to the grid. Maya has some really great alignment tools. And then there's a bunch of scripts you can download out there for random transformations and jitter. So what I went ahead and did, I set a keyframe. So you can see this is how I just laid out my basic pattern. And then just running a jitter script, I quickly got all this variation in my surface. And then it's really easy for me to go in and tweak things if I want to. So go in here and do that. Also, at any point, I can make different texture decisions. So maybe I just want to make this one a little bit smaller. Maybe this guy I want to make a little bit longer. Move this over. Maybe I just want to swap this one for another block. Say this is what I want to do. Quickly make that change. And there we go. The other thing, I set some keyframes on the grout plane you see behind these blocks, and this gives me a real idea of what my height map is going to look like. So at any point I can go in here and look at the range of my height map and go ahead and make quick edits to kind of refine what my height map is going to look like. Just a little something like that. Let's put this plane back. So another advantage, not having to fix any texture seams. So you can see here, I have a green block here and I have a green block here. Make sure it's the same block that crosses my tile line. If you have them have the same exact transform, except for the one translation that brings it to the other side of the texture, it will be perfectly tiling out of ZBrush and you never have to go back and fix a seam. So here, you can see it has the same exact transform on the right, and if I select the other one, they're all the same except the X is now 4 instead of 2. So now I get a perfectly tiling texture. Okay, so now that I'm happy with my pattern, before I take this back into ZBrush, I'm going to create some Maya sets. This way I can use them for polygroups inside of ZBrush. So I'm just going to grab the faces, and any block that crosses the tile line, I'm going to create a set. Okay, now that I have my sets created, I'm going to export selection to OBJ, and I'm going to save this as my first pattern. So I opened up this tool and something I call the Sculpt Setup. Every tiling texture that I work on starts with this as a base. It's made up of 3 subtools. I just have a character in here. I have 4 corners that I call the frame, and then I have my sculpt plane. The wrap mode is based on the frame, so if I started to sculpt, you can see it tiles based on this frame. So the reason this extends past the frame is that I can make a tiling texture and I don't have to worry about any edge crinkling because it happens out here and not on the tile line. I'm going to be using this later to actually get my texture out of Zbrush. So if I select the frame and I hit F and then I hide the frame, I'll get a perfectly tiling texture out of Zbrush. Alrighty, with my sculpt setup loaded, I'm going to append in my sculpt. There they are. I'm going to drop them to subdivision level 4 because that's the subdivision level that I exported them out to Maya. I'm going to import and I'm going to load in my pattern, and then my pattern loads in. I'm going to drop this down to subdivision 1 because I'm going to go ahead and handle my polygroups. Before I exported to Zbrush, I created some sets. So if I select the center and I go to polygroups and hit auto group. Okay. And now I go to my geometry and put this back up to 7. Okay. And lastly, hide my frame. So now with wrap mode set to 1 and mask by polygroups to 100, I can sculpt on each unique block and then still maintain tiling. So now that I have my pattern laid out, I can continue to sculpt on top of this and really refine the sculpt even more. Where you start to really see return on your investment is when I'm happy with this. If I want to repurpose this into any different pattern, I can quickly relay out that pattern and not lose any of my work because I've already dialed in all the kind of tilts and offsets and Z-depth and custom sculpting, and I just want to repurpose that to a new pattern. What I can do is when I'm done with the sculpt, bring it back into Maya, cluster it again, move them around, and export a new pattern. So now I can go to subdivision 4, do import. I laid out another pattern. And now I can just bring this back up to subdivision 7. And there you go. Drop this back down to subdivision 4 again. Import. Load in another pattern. And there you go. Now that I have my final sculpt, I'm going to want to export my textures out of Zbrush. I went to Document. I've already set it to 2048 by 2048. I'm at Anti-Aliased, Half Size, Perspective Off, and I have selected my frame. I'm going to hit F, and now I'm going to get rid of my frame. I'm going to put on my normal material. Under Z Plugin, Subtool Master, I'm going to go to Fill, Material, and hit OK. And that's it. I'm going to go to Zap Link, export this out. If I had done Polypaint, I would get a color map. I'm going to get my normal map, and I'm going to get my height map. I hope you guys found this useful, and thank you for watching.